Hey guys, it's Matt here, and today I'm doing another episode of Matt Rants. In the last episode of Matt Rants, I said we'd be doing two today, and this is that second episode. This one will be a little bit shorter than some of our other Matt Rants. This is going to be a follow-up to something we talked about months ago on the channel, so no real question, just me giving my thoughts on this. And also, what we're talking about in particular is a court case that Nintendo had won over the LoveRoms ROM website. If you don't know about LoveRoms, I talked about this a while ago. Basically, LoveRoms was a website that not only had ROMs, but they also were making ads. They were making ad revenue off of ads on the website. So this wasn't some non-profit attempt at trying to have game preservation. And they did not talk to either Nintendo or any other company about the ROMs that were listed on their website. They just had them there with the ads and also in browser games. So when I say in browser games, I'm saying that they were able to actually play these games in their own browsers using the website. Some of these ROMs, Super Mario, not just Super Mario, but a bunch of different other types of ROMs as well throughout the years. And there was you didn't have to download an emulator separately, play them on your PC or laptop or whatever. You could just play them directly from LoveRoms. Understandably, Nintendo was not happy, so I didn't even think this was going to be taken to court. I actually had a feeling that the people running this website maybe weren't even in the US. I was wrong on multiple accounts because this Arizona couple was taken to trial and they sided on the side of Nintendo for $12.23 million. $12.23 million. Now, while there was ad revenue to be gained from this, I don't think they made $12.23 million, although to be fair, even though I've never heard of LoveRoms, I've heard it was a popular website, and if people are going there, not just in the US, but worldwide, and they're viewing these ads, and they don't have pop-up blockers and things like that, and they're getting very, very popular games, not just Nintendo games, should also mention that as well, but still popular games nonetheless, then yes, they're going to, and also would like to mention as well, this was talked about in the court case last time I talked about it. Nintendo characters were also used on, their likenesses were used on the site as well. So in ways that Nintendo was trying to say was promoting it as if they were part of Nintendo in some way. I disagree with that, but at the same time they were being used. So it was just an entirely bad idea. Obviously, ROMs are illegal. I know that some of us are going to talk about game preservation. We've talked about it before, but at the same time, this wasn't a non-profit museum trying to claim fair use with game preservation. This was not a review website that only had maybe certain clips online for a review or something like that. There were no notes on this. It was just, here is a way to download the entire game. And while I will admit, last time I was hoping that Nintendo doing this was to try to prep for their Nintendo Online service for the Switch. However, from what I've seen, it doesn't seem like there are enough games on there to justify removing the entirety of the libraries. However, again, we do have to acknowledge that even though Nintendo hasn't been re-releasing these games, certain ones like for the GameCube or N64, it's still, because there is no N64 Classic as of yet, although that might be on the way. I've talked about that in a Matt Rants that was out a few months ago, but still, that doesn't mean that they don't have the they don't have the rights to that, they don't have the copyright, and that's not their intellectual property because it still is. This isn't a licensing issue or something like that where another company, this isn't an anime thing where another company who licensed it is coming in to take it down. This is Nintendo. They own the rights to it in America and abroad. So it's just frustrating because while I don't want every website to go down, because yes, there are some games, not even Nintendo, we're moving away from Nintendo for a second, there are some games that they're very hard to find. You're not going to be able to find them online. Different things like builds to games and alpha versions and stuff like that. But I think one thing that we have to remember is that is why not only museums exist, but it doesn't, just because these ROMs are not as easily accessible doesn't mean that they're off of the internet completely. I'm not going to tell you where to get them in particular, but that doesn't mean that because a few websites, and yes, not just LoveRoms, but a few other websites have closed down because they got nervous by LoveRoms, that doesn't mean that every single ROM site is gone and that every single ROM has been scrubbed from the internet. As long as there's somebody with a CD in their house from 13 years ago with ROMs exist. But yes, there are some ROMs I fully admit will be harder to find. That is frustrating. But at the same time, what we do have to do is turn our focus to our legislators, turn our focus to politicians, and try to vote or try to at least call your, and I mean call, don't just email, don't message, call your local politicians and talk to them about things like this. And the reason why I say that is because, and I'm not talking about preserving your 30-year-old Nintendo game that's still on a cartridge, that you can still find online, that you can buy digitally through digital store. I mean talking to, your local congressman about potentially trying to find ways that museums can legally be allowed to preserve these games in mass, and maybe we can find a way to one day go to a museum and play them and things like that, digitally. So that is what we're going to need to do, because we're never going to get to the point, and I'm sorry to say this, guys, we're never going to get to the point where we can convince a judge or we can convince politicians that it is our right to download games that are 30 years old. Yes, there are orphan titles. That happens in the movie industry as well. Sadly, we just move on, right? People just move on. The difference is that, and this isn't always the case, but sometimes it is, the ability to get the orphan movie, that isn't, let's say, a movie that the copyright holders have, since the company's closed, no one bought them out, it's orphaned, right? Even though those, the download for that usually isn't on the same site for a download for the new Venom movie or something like that. Or if it is, then that site is overseas, so it isn't in the US, which also, just as a side note, confused me as well, that this was an Arizona couple, and that the site was registered under Matthias Designs. Why? Why would someone think that that would be the right thing to do? I don't really understand why they thought that would be the best approach. Now, I'm not saying you should do this if you don't live in the US, but why would you think that this would actually work, that these ads would be able to get you money from this, and that Nintendo would never come after you? Because if you're thinking about this and thinking, oh no, but Nintendo would come after us one day, then you don't do it. There's no fair use, there's no kind of way to twist it here. This isn't some kind of design, some fan art thing or anything like that. This is someone uploading ROMs directly to the internet. Now, maybe they didn't think Nintendo would do it, but still, if it wasn't Nintendo, it potentially could have been Sony. It could have been any company that wanted to get their ROMs removed from the website. I'm not exactly sure why they thought it was appropriate to put this up at all. Being in the US, having their servers in the US, I know, I'm not trying to say in any way that it would be more legal if it wasn't in the US, because, there still are copyright laws throughout the world in relation to the US, but still, I don't really understand why that even happened to begin with. That's just another point entirely, though, because again, they weren't focusing on orphan titles in particular. They had their Super Mario Worlds up. They had a bunch of other games up for the N64, for the GameCube, for the NES and the SNES. While there are classics out for the NES and SNES, this would be a much different situation if I was told, or if I had heard, or even, read up on it and been on the website and had seen that, they're only focusing on stuff that different companies are not putting out anymore legally. So, for that Yakuza run, specifically I'm referring to Sega reprinting Yakuza for the PS2, if during that run they removed Yakuza from the website, okay, I would actually look at that and I'd go, interesting. Yes, it's still illegal, of course, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, it would be a bit different. There'd be a bit of a leg to stand on versus getting money from games that already exist. Or rather, games that exist in some form or another today that you could rebuy. Now, two things that should be noted before we wrap things up. The first is that even though $12.23 million has been awarded to Nintendo, that does not mean that the couple will be paying off the entirety of it or anywhere near the entirety of it. Things can still be, even though this was a ruling, this can still be talked about outside of court, and they could still bring them down in some way or another. In fact, I'm sure that their lawyer did tell them, this is the second thing I wanted to bring up, to give an apology message, to somehow post an apology message on their website, which they did, and I'm going to read the statement to you right now. Their statement is, our website, loveroms.com/loveretro.co, previously offered and performed unauthorized copies of Nintendo games, in violation of Nintendo's copyrights and trademarks. Loveroms.com/loveretro.co acknowledges that it caused harm to Nintendo, its partners, and customers by offering infringing copies of Nintendo games, and has agreed to cease all such activities. To access legitimate Nintendo games online, please visit www.nintendo.com for information about the Nintendo Game Store. So, Yes, they did say that, and I'm sure that's huge damage control on their end. Again, I'm sure their lawyer told them, you do that to take off millions of dollars off of that. But at the same time, look, this is a huge amount that they'd have to pay. I fully admit that. But I want to know, which I'm sure we'll never be privy to this information, I want to know how much money they made by ads on the website. And the reason why is because if these ads weren't based on how many times you clicked on them just by visiting the website, that's all you need to do, and visiting other pages as well. There's a reason why certain websites have, click on this, to get here, because every single time you view that page, it's another piece of ad revenue, a small one, but with millions of people wanting to download ROMs across the world, and many of them without ad blocker perhaps, yes, this could end up being a situation where they actually made good money from this until they were hit with this lawsuit. Now again, I'm not saying that their lives should be ruined by this, I'm just saying that with their apology and everything like that, there's a good chance that I do think that they'll be not completely alright, but if they're getting off with no jail time, there's a chance they might be better off than we think. But of course, there are a bunch of other people who aren't making money off of their ROM streaming websites or ROM downloading websites, and they're sitting back and thinking, oh no, we don't want to get hit with that. We don't have that kind of money, or anywhere near that kind of money. We don't make money off of these websites. And then that's the reason why at the time they took their ROMs down en masse. Either way, when it comes to Nintendo's service for the Switch, the online service, I don't think they have enough games right now. That is frustrating. I get where you guys are coming from if you're saying, hey, we can't play these games because they're being taken down, and I totally get where you guys are coming from because I feel the exact same way. I don't think that it's good to take them down and then all of a sudden you're going to have cartridges or other CDs and things like that kind of rise up in price as they have been throughout the years, but at the same time, I don't think that people are going to be so deterred that they're going to go right back to buying these en masse, and all of a sudden, now the prices all rise just because everyone couldn't get ROMs. You can still get ROMs. You can still find these online. They're just a little bit harder to find. And I know that's frustrating, but again, like I mentioned earlier, Nintendo is legally in the right, and I do think that this would have changed. It would have been different, and maybe I'm wrong, but I do think it would have been different if there weren't as many ads, if a lot of money wasn't being made from this website, how brazen and bold that it was. I do wonder if that also pissed Nintendo off even more, and this also could just be a giant show for their investors as well, maybe some of them not understanding that just because someone downloads a ROM doesn't mean that they'd be instead pouring hundreds and thousands of dollars into Nintendo products instead. So this also may have just been a way to make them sweat a little bit less, feeling like they're giving money to Nintendo. And also another thing too that I mentioned last time in the last Matt Rants I did on this is that another thing too is that you do have to protect your copyrights. If you show too much lenience, then the next time someone comes out and does something even more egregious, like selling repros, in a store like a Target or something, then all of a sudden you would have Nintendo trying to come after them, and then the courts would say, well, you've set precedents by not going after these people in the past, so you have to go after them. So I do wonder if this is trying to set a precedent of Nintendo strong-arming different people who host these ROMs. And again, I do think that the money also played a part in it as well. If this was a free thing, if they were only hosting Nintendo ROMs that aren't released in the US, like, Marvelous, my brain goes to Captain Marvelous because of Gokaiger. But no, it was, I'm pretty sure the game was called Marvelous, and there's some other Nintendo games as well, maybe even like the Zelda BS stuff, the other Satellaview stuff. I think that if they were hosting those, it would be much different than hosting Star Fox, Metroid, other games that are clearly available either on the NES Classic or either through Nintendo streaming service, or that are, funnily enough, still available on the Wii U. We forget that the Wii U still has a store. I'm pretty sure you can still get stuff on the Wii U store. So I'm not saying you should or that you should get a Wii U, but still, if you have one, you can still get stuff on the store, if I remember correctly. Also, something else I would like to note before wrapping this up, I do wonder if a judge maybe looked at this. The reason why it's at $12.23 million, a judge may have looked at the calculations that maybe a lawyer made or something like that and thought, oh wow, that's how much much revenue, X amount per game, not really looking at the fact that the Nintendo Switch online service is only, what is it? It is cheap. It's like $20 a year. It is really, really cheap. So when it comes to the Nintendo Switch online service, because I don't have a Switch myself, I want to get one, but I don't have one just yet. But when it comes to the Nintendo Switch online service, you're not paying per game. Yes, I wish there were more games on the service because I've seen some people talk about the games on the service. I think that there are not as many as there should be. But still, when it comes to the Nintendo Switch online service, it's not like someone is actually paying per game. But either way, I want to hear what you guys have to think. Do you think that this was right? Do you think it was wrong? Do you think that Nintendo shouldn't be going after these websites or that they should be going after these websites? I don't think they should, but they have every legal right to. Do you think that 12.23 million is way too much? Do you think it's way too little depending on how much ad revenue was made through the website? Did you, if you were there, if you had seen LoveRoms because you were doing research on a project and you were on LoveRoms before it was shut down, were there that many ads? Were there not that many ads? I want to hear what you guys have to say down below. Thank you all so much for listening or watching another episode of Matt Rants. You can like and subscribe if you like the video. If you don't like the video, you can still like and subscribe either way. Also, you can get audio versions of these over at our Patreon, patreon.com/TGProductions. And depending on what tier you give to, you can get all the audio versions of these, not just one or another, every single Matt Rants I've ever done in audio format. Alright guys, thank you all so much. Love you all. Take care. And tune in next time for another episode of Matt Rants. Alright guys, so take care and see ya.